Okay. Thank you very much for the organizer for the invitation. It has been a pleasure to come here because, as you will notice, I am not working directly on aspects like sentiment analysis, but I will do that in the future. That's our intention. We have been dealing with data about Twitter related with social movement and information spreading. And the next step would be precisely to do some analysis of the content of the tweets and related with emotions or with polarization, these kind of things. And this is something that we will do with one of the partners of Cyberemotions, with ETH. So I hope to somehow capitalize on the tools developed by Cyberemotions. The talk is about online networks and the diffusion of protests. Is about essentially grassroots movements that have taken place in several parts of the world, and specifically we will address the case of the 50M movement in Spain, but it's quite similar to Occupy Wall Street and other movements around Europe and across the world. Essentially, what we did was to collect tweets, and from the tweets we extract features, both from the network, the topological patterns, and also regarding information flow between the users of the networks and people that were involved in that movement. And then after that, we will also like to develop some models to somehow reproduce the results that you find when you analyze the data. So that's the cycle. First, collect data, analyze data, develop models, and then validate or somehow calibrate the model with what you have seen in the data. We'll work with structure and dynamics because both are quite related. The structure somehow determines dynamics, and dynamics, if the system is self-adaptive, then also shapes the topology of the system. And one example of this interrelation between topology and dynamics is the case of epidemic spreading. This one point here is flight. It's a plane that is flying from one point to the other. And this has changed a lot the way we model disease spreading. And this is essentially because of the change in our mobility pattern, how we have evolved from society in which people were traveling from town to town at very low speed, while now we move from one point of the year to another point in less than 12 or 24 hours, depending on how long is your trip. And this makes that the process is not anymore a diffusion process like this, or you cannot model this like that. But you have to develop new tools to analyze these patterns of mobility and also to model the dynamics of the system. And that's the kind of thing we would like to do for information spreading on ICT system, and in particular on online social networks. So the set of data is the following. We just collected 1 month from April 25 to May 25, 2011. Although the Twitter static or topological network in Spain is around 3 million users, in that month around 90,000 were talking about 50M. And we're talking purportedly because we don't know if they were talking about the 50M in a positive or in a negative sense. Maybe people, I'm sure there are a lot of people that say, I don't like 50M. Most of them were involved and were contributing to the movement, but all of them were not in that position. So that's why we would like to also analyze the content of the messages. Roughly 600,000 messages in that month. Well, around there were a lot of different hashtags, but with these 70 hashtags, they are the main hashtags that were identified with the movement. You get around 99% of all messages related to the 50M. And within these 70, 10 of them are the most used. It's like, the frequency, when you plot the frequencies of use of different hashtags, tens account for more than 80% of the meshes, and or to 70, you arrive to 99. This is a real picture of what was going on the streets. This is a square in Madrid, central square in Madrid. This is Plaza del Sol. And the movement is called 15M because the camping was precisely that day. Just to give you an idea, sorry, let me just to give you an idea of how the movement develops. This is 50M is accounts for t equal to 0, and 20 days before there was not too much activity, was related with people that were not in agreement with some cuts from the government or some measures that were taken at that time. And then you see that first protest attempts in main cities, then students occupy University in Madrid, first mass demonstrations on main cities, and this is the photo. And then in 6, 8, 10 days, more or less, the system went from around 4,000, 5,000 users to almost 90,000 users, just in very small period of time. So this, for the physicists, and I will go back to this, resembles second-order phase transition, something like that. It's something that is developing very slowly, and then you have this kind of change in the system. So as I was discussing before, Twitter is a very, the platform, you have the followers and the following, and then this defines the underlying network, and this is what we call kind of structure of the system. But what we will analyze here is the functional network emerging from that system. Essentially, what you consider is that, okay, I have 3 million users, but not all of them are tweeting about 50M. So I just consider as an active element of my system, those that are tweeting, that use one of these 70 hashtags. This leaves you with what we call functional network. It's like in the brain. The brain, you have a lot of neurons or different regions, but if you, for example, do kind of functional magnetic resonance image, you are only able to see those regions that show some activity. The rest of the region for you is like if they were not at that point. It's like the same like if you fly around a city at daylight you can see the detail of the streets, the buildings, but if you fly at night you only see those that are lighted. So in that sense, Twitter is the same. You can only detect user activity if they emit some messages related to what you are measuring. So this is what we call our functional network, and we will analyze the dynamics and the structure of this network. Well, the first thing is just the distribution of meshes. Is the strength. It's how many meshes on average, or how many meshes a given individual sends, and this is the probability distribution. The probability of having number of meshes with a given strength, a number of users that have sent a number of meshes or have received a number of meshes. And as you see, it's more or less steady as times go along. This is the first day. Okay, this is very short, was not very active, the system. And then when the movement develops, you reach a region in which more or less is steady, the system. More important, you see that there is an asymmetry in the system between messages received and messages that were sent, and this is due to the heterogeneity of the user's behavior. And this is something that I will go back to this, but this is just a simulation of what is a typical, profile in the system. This is a guy which is very popular. He's an actor in Spain and is very active in Twitter. And to the left, you can see the message he received, and to the right, the message he sends. And you see that he received a lot more messages than the number he sends, that most of the time are retweets, not done by himself. And then you will see another user that is what we call a common user, that is the contrary. He received a lot more, less messages than the number of messages he sent. So it's very active in that sense. This is more or less representation of two typical users in the network, and you see that the profile as far as number of messages received and number of messages sent are completely different. This is the difference between them is mainly in the number of messages received. And this is important for the information flow of the system, because what most of the people are in the network are followers. In fact, 75% of the people in the network are followers. That means that they follow more people than people follow them. And this is a very large number. It's 3/4 of the network. And this, of course, this is a topological property, but this has to have some consequence on the dynamics of the system. And actually, it's that way. If you look at the cumulative number of users that receive a given amount of information, this is normalized to 1. This is 1 means these 600 tweets, and what we plot here is how many users receive a given percentage of information. So, for example, if you see here, this is the number of tweets sent. You see that after the movement took off, more or less this is steady. 50% of the messages are generated by roughly 10% of the users in my system. But this is not the same when you see the number of messages that a user receives. You see that this is continuously shifting to the left, which means that by the end of the movement or of the data collection period, 50% of all the information generated in the network were received by less than 1% of the users. So this is very asymmetric also from the point of view of information flow. And this is because people tend to send the message to somebody that he thinks or she thinks is more connected in the network than himself. For example, these are typically celebrities, newspapers, these kind of users in the network that on the other hand, they are sinks of information. They do not retweet, they do not resend your information. So people are sending the message to them with the hope that they will spread further the message, but at the end, the message gets stuck there, and it's just the cascade finished there. You are not able to reach larger part of the network. And this is something that, as time goes on, is more and more pronounced here. So one thing that you can also look at is the structure of the mentioned network in this case, which is made by 1/3 of the messages were geolocalized, and then you can associate the region and destination of the message with the cities, the areas, urban areas in Spain, and then you can see if how is the communication between people, because this is a global platform, so it's supposed to be used to communicate globally. But actually what you see is that most of the people communicate to their neighbor, to people that are on the same place. This is okay for the nature of the movement. This is okay. This is something that we will expect, because mainly this kind of communication means are used for coordination purposes. They mainly use this to get, okay, let's meet at that point at 7 p.m. or wherever it be. So this is somehow a result that once you know the answer, you say, okay, this is something that I would have expected a priori. But it's interesting that in other cases, half of the message goes out of the community. So in principle, most of the message remains there, but they are also communicating, and they are also somehow linking different communities for big mass demonstration countrywide. Another feature that is interesting to look at is to who are the leaders, followers, and what is the role of mass media. This is something that was put forward by our collaborators, Sandra González Bailón. She's a sociologist at Oxford Internet Institute. And in sociology, you are, this social sciences is very important to know what are the, for example, for social contagion models, it's very important to know what is the role of each participant, what is your threshold for activation, and also what is the role of exogenous factor like, for example, mass media. So we look at this, and as we have, Twitter have the advantage that is timestamp data. So we know what is the exact moment a given individual tweeted for the first time. And at that point, you can look at the neighbors of this guy, of this user, and check how many of the neighbors are already active. And then you can define kind of measure, which is the fraction of neighbors that are active when you activate it for the first time. And then roughly you can divide this in 3 regions. People that 20% of less of the neighbors were not active or were active when they tweeted for the first time. These are what we call early adopters. These are people that do not need too much input from outside to activate themselves. They are early adopters. Then you have late adopters, who are those that needs at least 50% of the neighborhood active to start tweeting or to start doing something related to the movement. This 50%, well, you can plot this, varying a little bit this, and the profile of the curve is more or less the same. This is kind of, okay, reflecting a behavior which is, okay, this maybe I don't understand, I'm not very happy taking part of this, but all of my friends are taking part of this, so this should be cool, let's join the movement or let's join the discussion or whatever it be. And these are the mid adopters, those that are just in the middle. As you can see here, precisely these kind of people are the more important for the takeoff of the movement, because you have these early adopters here, but as soon as these mid guys, the people that are in the middle, they don't need not too much, not too less of an input to join the movement. As these start to grow, then the movement also start to grow. And this, on the other hand, induce late adopters to adopt also the tweets or to be involved in the movement. So from point of view of what is an influential, okay, this is an influencer, but these are what we can call susceptibles or less susceptible individuals or more susceptible individuals. And these are very important, because if you have this and you have this, but you don't have this, then your movement is like a gap in the middle, and then your movement will not take off. So this is a conclusion, and the other aspect that we can check is whether mass media played any role in the development of the movement. This is the curve I showed before. This is the active number of users and the number of messages that were sent in time. And this is a number of headlines according to this nexus. This is just index headlines and Google. And then you see that in both cases they arrive later. This in particular, Google was showing some kind of activity here, and Nexus indexes this. And this index all the headlines in the country. But then if you go and look at the records, you notice that the first headline published in a major journal or newspaper in Spain was on May 17. These May 15 headlines were in kind of provincial or kind of small newspapers, not nationwide. So that's an indication that the movement was self-organized somehow, was something that the motivation was endogenous, was not due to the influence of external media. Obviously, after the first campaigns, then they were involved, and in fact, one of these that were this less than 1% were the newspapers, but at the beginning they were not there. So we see that we neither have, we have these early adopters and this meets adapters, and then that the mass media play no role. The next question is, okay, where are these guys in the network? Where are these recruiters, these early adopters? Well, they are scattered through the network. They are not in any specific position. One measure of centrality networks you can test. There are a lot of centrality measures, but one of these is the core number. And then if you plot here the core number as a function of the fraction of neighbors that you have active when you first activate it, you see that there is no any correlation, both for the full network are for what we call symmetrical networks. Symmetrical network is just an instance of this network. Is just from a sociological point of view, it's important that relationships are considered bidirectionally, because the fact that I tweet you doesn't mean that I'm your friend. I need also that you respond me to consider that this is a full relationship between the two users. Symmetrical relation between them. So you see that they are scattered through the network, and then the question was, okay, if they are scattered through the network, and I know that they are influential individuals, let's try to look at what is the probability that a given individual generates networks, cascades. So early adopters are not in any position or central position. They are just around the network, but this doesn't imply anything about the cascades of information cascades, because we see, for example, that mass media were not early adopters, but they are very important in the dynamics of the system. So one way to measure information cascades, as we call it, is to define a cascade in the following way. This is inspired by this spiking in neuron science. Essentially what we consider if, okay, I just have a spike, this is a tweet or something, and this obviously is received by all of my neighbors, and then I check if within a time window one of my neighbors also tweets, then I consider that he or she, her or his answer was somehow motivated by my tweet. Obviously, one can define cascades in many different ways. This is something that is natural from point of view of dynamics. If you consider retweets, this could be another option, but retweeted cascades are usually shorter. On the other hand, you can also consider mentions or something like that, but it's like this sentiment analysis in the sense that there are a lot of different scenarios and there are a lot of different contextual cases in which you can always find an example in which you don't capture the dynamics if you consider retweet, or if you consider content, or if you consider whatever you want. For example, I can say, I don't know, a simple answer to a message. I receive a message, I'm going to El Sol Square to join the movement. And then 1 hour later or 15 minutes later, I can answer, okay, go, I'm not going. I'm just reacting to your message, but it's not a retweet. So in some sense, this is also a natural way to take into account the information flow or the causal relationships between different messages. So with this definition of cascades, one can compute what is the probability of generating cascades of a given size during the whole period, if you want, or there's, well, I think I'm missing one, but it's okay. This is from the first 10 days. You see that the cascades are short, are really short, because the system was not very active at that moment. But then when you go to the most active period, just 2 days before the campaigns and 6 days after the campaigns, you see that the system is able to generate cascades of very, very large size, almost the size of the system. And actually, when you look at this is kind of distribution, which is you have a gap. This is more or less like if you were in a supercritical regime. This is qualitatively and not quantitatively saying that this is kind of phase transition or a kind of supercritical regime, but it looks like.
Excuse me, what's the difference between first and second row?
Yeah, this is considering both the spreaders and the ones that receive the information, and this is considering only those that are actually spreading the messages. That's why this is a little bit shorter than this one. So now the following step is, okay, I have identified or I have proposed a way to measure cascades, and now I know who are the guys that generate these system-wide cascades, and I would like to know where they are in the network. And in this case, I can say that there is a correlation between the position of the user in the network and the ability to generate system-wide cascades. In principle, these orange nodes here. They are more of the time, they are very central to the network. In fact, if you look at the same picture as before, this is the number, the probability of generating cascade of a given size divided by the system size. So you see that the larger your core number is, the more likely it is that you generate system-wide cascades. And this also happens for full network and for the symmetrical network. So in this case, we can say, okay, if you are more central, you have more chances to generate system-wide cascades. Using all this information, we can classify the users in this Twitter world. Essentially, there are 4 kind of users there. What are common users, and you see that here is darker. This means that the frequency of individuals there is larger, is the highest. Most of the people are common users. That means that you usually have more following than followers. And that you usually receive more messages than the number of messages you send. You usually send more messages than the number of messages you receive. Then there is these broadcasters. These individuals are very funny because they are people that have a lot of activity. They are tweeting a lot of time because what they try to do is to compensate the lack of connectivity or the lack of centrality with very high activity, very abundant tweeting. So they, at the end, we took up just randomly a few of these individuals, and you see the timeline, and they are very active. They are tweeting all the time. And they are not very well connected in the system, but they are very active, dynamically speaking. So they try to compensate the lack of connectivity with a very active participation in the network. Then there is what we call the influentials. Influentials are central as far as connectivity concerned because they have more followers than the number of people they are following, and also they receive a lot of more messages than the number of messages they send. In fact, some of them are sinks of information because the number of messages sent out is almost zero in most of the time. Usually newspapers do not make any retweet or something like that. They just generate their own news and spread it, and that's all. And then what we call hidden influencers, because these are individuals that a priori you would not expect to play any important role because they are not very well connected and they are not very active neither in the network, but they are people that usually are selected by the common users and the broadcaster that receive these messages, and also they are active spreading, retweeting, or whatever be in the network. So this is kind of division of the user. Most of them are here, but these are important because these are easily identified. You can expect these celebrities and newspapers, so on and so forth, but these are people that a priori are blind to you. You don't know who they are. So this is a video that we made with the tweets that were geolocalized. This is 1/3 of the set. Is 200 and something users. Well, this is the whole set, but in the video we used only 1/3. Because they were localized. I think it's better if because the video is a little bit 16th of May, no, just a little bit before. So, for example, this is two days before. You already noticed some activity around the main cities is Madrid and Barcelona, and the place where I come is here in Zaragoza. And you see that there is some activity already going on the system, but this is 15th of May, and this is where the main campings took place at that moment, and you see that there are a lot of the increase of activities evidence. Please note also what we were discussing about the geography of the tweets. Most of the tweets are just trapped here in the same community, but from time to time, or quite often in some cases, they travel to this. Obviously, Madrid is the center of the campaign, of the movement, because there were the main campus took place there. Then one of the most common hashtags is Acampada Sol, and this is located in Madrid, so many messages are directed to Madrid. So I have some time still to discuss what we do next with this data. The issue is, okay, now I have characterized this social movement, and then I would like to focus on the information, diffusion of information. How can I model this information that I send you something and then you send this to somebody else, so on and so forth, theoretically. Or at least something that I can model without the need to acquire this huge amount of data and invest a lot of time processing this. I want to get some insight from a theoretical point of view. So one thing that is there is the issue that the larger your core number of centrality is, the more likely is that you generate system-wide cascades. And this is something that has been also observed in epidemic spreading. In epidemic spreading, you see, okay, I take one of the models for disease spreading, SIR, SIS, and I just compute what are the influential spreaders in the network. In this case, the influential meaning is that you are more efficient at transmitting the disease. In this case, it's the same, but I am not transmitting a disease, I am transmitting a rumor or idea or belief or whatever it be. However, the epidemic model and rumor model have some difference between them, and are important difference. The generation, the creation term is the same. With a given probability, if I am in contact with you, I transmit the rumor to you or the disease. This is the same for both. But when you have an epidemic disease, the annihilation process or how the process dies out is essentially depending on the disease. You have a recovery time. If you got the flu, okay, this is typically between 5 days, maybe 7 days, depending on the flu. But you know that irrespective of whether you contact other people, this will sooner or later will decline. The process will die out if we are talking about an SIR model. In rumor, the annihilation process depends on the interactions, because I keep saying the rumor to people until I learn that the rumor have lost the interest of this. For example, I take the phone. This is classical rumor model. I take the phone and call somebody of you and say, okay, do you know that whatever? Yeah, okay, I didn't know. Okay. Then I call somebody else, and then that people tell me, I know. So at that moment, I start thinking, okay, this is not news anymore. Maybe people are already aware of this, but let me try again. So I call somebody else, and then this person also tells me that he already or she already knows the rumor. So at that point, I say, okay, this is not a news anymore. This is not a rumor. Everybody is aware of this. I stop transmitting the rumor. So I need to interact with people, with other elements in my system, to know that the rumor is not important, it's not news anymore. And this is an important difference with respect to disease spreading. And it's very important to the point in which if you implement the rumor dynamics in this kind of systems, using, for example, the network of Twitter's users, you are unable to reproduce this pattern. Something that if you implement an epidemic model, you will get this. So this tells us that something is wrong with the model. There are some features that are not in the model and that are not reproducing some of the dynamical features that I observed from the data. So next is, okay, what I have to do is to improve the model. And there are two things that in principle give qualitatively similar results to this figure that came out from the data. The first is to take into account the fact that the activity of the user is heterogeneous. Essentially, you don't decide randomly whether to tweet or not. You sometimes have a burst of activity around, I don't know, maybe lunchtime or something like that, but then you stop tweeting for a period, and then you have another period in which you are tweeting. So the activity of the human is bursty, and this means that it's not uniform, as we were assuming before, and it's kind of, well, it have another form. So, I'm sure most of you know that there are a lot of work there that have shown somehow that the activity of the human is kind of power law distributed. That means that the inter-event times is distributed as this way, so you have this kind of burst activity in which you generate a lot of information in a short period of time, and then there is a kind of period in which you don't generate any information, and so on and so forth, and this is distributed according to a power law. So you can test different hypotheses for the activity of the individual, and then you see that when the system when the activity is a power law distribution, then you get more or less the same kind of functional form that was obtained before. So that's one aspect you have to take into account. If you somehow inform the model with this, then you start to get closer to what you observe from your data. And another issue, and is specifically for Twitter, and I guess for other processes also of information spreading, is the fact that in the original model, if an ignorant, which is called ignorant, is in contact with a spreader, then with probability lambda, the spreader, the ignorant turns into a spreader, is aware of the rumor, and then start transmitting the rumor. And with probability alpha, if this spreader meets another spreader, or what is called a stifler, somebody that knows the rumor but is not transmitting the rumor, then this spreader also goes to the stifler class. But in Twitter, there is another transition that is not taken into account here. It's the fact that if I am your follower and you tweet something, I knew that, I learned that, but that doesn't imply that I will become active, that I will start tweeting about that. I just learned that, okay, 50M is on the way. Okay, that's okay, but that doesn't mean that I will be active or that I will tweet about this. So there is an intermediate transition also, which is not only between ignorance and stifler, and a stifler for two spreaders and a spreader for a stifler, but also from ignorance to a stifler. That are people that are aware of the rumor, but they don't transmit the rumor, and they didn't transmit the rumor never. So that's a kind of transition. And just by assuming that this occurs with a probability P, you can then simulate what happens in the system, and you get these three curves depending on the value of P. And as you see, the green one is very, very close. In fact, it's almost parallel to the blue one, which is the one that came from the results, experimental results from the data. So in summary, you can say, okay, I'm able to capture the dynamics. Essentially, the two mechanisms behind this kind of dynamics is, from one hand, the fact that people activity is not uniform in time, is heterogeneous, is kind of bursty activity, and the other aspect is that not everybody that learns the rumor actually transmit the rumor. They go directly to the stifler class. And with these two ingredients, you are able to recover your experimental curve. So I think I have left just one slide to for Occupy Wall Street case. This is a simulation of the same process, but with using the Occupy Wall Street data. And what you see here is essentially these are urban areas in the States, and this represents, as before, connections between users in one urban area and one state actually, and the other one. And the point starts from the capital of the state to the other point, the capital of the other state. And so you see that at the beginning it's quite scattered, and then as the movement also develops there, then you see that the network becomes denser and denser and denser. And the next step, and this is work in preparation, is to okay, now I know how to characterize the structure and dynamics of the system. I can even understand some of the mechanisms driven the information diffusion. And the next question is, can I predict this? Can I develop a set of indicators to at least know, I don't know how many times before, but at least know in advance that something is somehow cooking in the system? I'm not talking about only about movement. This is okay. This is very appealing example, but I'm talking about process which is information driven. It's social contagion, which is called. Essentially, it's something that's okay. It's a process in which you receive multiple inputs from different sources, and then at some points you pass your threshold and you decide to become active in spreading that news or that rumor or whatever it be. Or if we are talking about technology, you adopt the technologies, an Apple or just Google as a browser, default browser or whatever it be. And then at that point you say, okay, should I be, could I be in the position to predict if this product will go viral or will go to that point with small increment of whatever it be the system. I am able to generate information cascades that reach the whole system, and that's the question. And in this work, we will advance a few of our findings in that direction. So I think this is all. This is a list of reference for those of you that are interested in this, and I would be happy to answer your question. I have a couple of. Yeah, I have. I was not sure about the time I had, so I left a couple of transparencies if you want to add something.
Thank you very much for this hot talk. Yeah. If you consider political rumors or real social rumors that were important for the Spain at that time, if you compare these kinds of rumors with rumors related, for example, to new products, would you see or would you expect to see any difference? Because this is important for marketing, so-called viral marketing, how the rumors are spreading.
Yeah, I think that, well, that's something that we will try to answer in the project that we just got. But I will say, yes, you're right. I think that, for example, influential spreaders will be domain specific. I mean, there are big actors in the social, in online networks like newspapers and these kind of things that, okay, they will be always there. But depending on what are you talking about, the influential spread would be one of the or the other. And one way to look at this is using this notion of multiplex networks. These are examples of the 15M, but this is elections, general strikes, economic crisis in Spain, and so. And one thing is to consider the system as kind of multi-level network in which you have users in each topic, that could be, this is political, but you can consider sports, culture, or topic, or whatever you want. And then the challenge is to define what is an influential individual at the system level, because, okay, I know how to define influential individual in one layer, but I'm sure that they will not be the same from layer to layer.
There will be different.
Yeah, I think so.
The issue, if the topology would be similar or not.
I think that, well, the global property of the system may be similar, yeah, for sure. For example, I'm sure you will find this kind of power law distribution for strength or for the number of messages sent and these kind of things. But locally, which is what defines what an influential individual is at the very beginning, because that depends on your how much you influence your neighbors, that will be different. And this is something that you already see here. For example, this is general strike. You see that the main actors here were the users and also also movements and the political parties. But then here you have this were the election. Obviously, the actors were completely different, and so I think that if you represent this, somehow you will have different influencers here, and for each layer, and maybe there is one which is global and influential spread, but not for each layer. That's something we would like to look at in the future.
Yes, please.
This is a question about the methodology that you use to find these cascades. You mentioned that different ways to evaluate, to measure cascades in such systems, like using semantic analysis, for instance. Here you use something completely different, just looking at time delays between messages.
Yeah.
Did you use some statistical procedure to evaluate whether or not you really measure cascades, or maybe comparing the content of the messages using semantic analysis?
No. Yeah, what we did was this is very general definition, information network of information cascade. We haven't looked at the text of the messages, but what we did was you consider that at given time you have a time window, let's say 1 hour, and then we test different time windows, and more or less all of them were equivalent. The results were completely equivalent. You always get this kind of power law distribution, and the only thing that slightly changed a little bit is the slope, but very, very small changes. So you consider 1 day for 1 hour, for example, and then you say, within this 1 hour, there are a lot of people that tweet at that moment. So at that point, you say, I will take this randomly and will consider this as a seed of this cascade, and then do this process many times, randomizing the initial seed and then just taking the average of these information cascades. And what you find is that these influential spreaders, no matter how you do this kind of seed cascades or not, they are systematically influential, generating system-wide cascades. That's why they are influential in that sense. But yes, in principle, you work with average cascade sizes. Yeah, this point have error bars that are not. This is the average of many simulations for the same core number and for different initial conditions, so on and so forth. But yes, we can try to define the cascades in other different ways. But there would be always a reason to choose one or another or another.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.